Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore all things cinema. And today I am very happy to have Dwayne Epstein on the show, who is the author of the New York Times bestseller Lee Marvin, Point Blank, and Other Acclaimed Biographies. Prior to writing biographies, Epstein contributed articles to Film Facts magazine, Cahiers du Cinema's Serious Pleasures, and film reviews for Hearst Community Newspapers. And today we're discussing his new book, Killing Generals, which is so much fun. It is the making of the Dirty Dozen, the most iconic WWII movie of all time. Dwayne, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Robert, thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. And by the way, save time real quick. It's Epstein, not Epstein.
I was just going to ask. I said,
That's okay.
I was thinking I should have asked before we started recording. I'm like, is it Epstein or Epstein?
I used to play that game in school. The first day of school, the teacher would ask how my name would be pronounced. It's Steen or Stein. I would say Steen. Next day, she'd ask again, and I would say Stein. I love messing with teachers. It was fun.
There you go. There you go. Why not? Why not? I love the book, as I said, because when I read a book, I normally set time to get about 20 pages a day in. And then I'm like, okay, in 2 weeks I'll have this done, or depending on the length of the book. And by the time I got to the end of it, I'm like, didn't I just start this yesterday? It's so engaging, and I love the stories from beginning to end. So well done, really great, really great work.
Thank you very much. I truly appreciate that.
I wanted to start before we get into the book. When did your interest in writing begin?
Oh, that's a great question. It's often said when you get a great idea, it's like a light bulb going off in the back, top of your head. The truth of the matter is, a friend of mine who's a writer said that's not what it's like. It's a 2x4 in the back of your neck going, hey, stupid, think it out. For me, it was based on the fact that it was a two-pronged assault. My whole life, I've always loved movies. And as far as my writing goes, it was based on the fact that I was a so-so student in school, but whenever there was a quiz that required an essay or any kind of essay question, boy, I'd load it on. That was often the thing that would save me was essay questions. And it took me a long time to realize I can do this. It's not like I can't fit, I don't particularly care for the mechanics of writing. I couldn't diagram a sentence to save my life, but I do know how to write, proper grammar, basic grammar, what makes something interesting to read, how to build to an interesting conclusion. And one of the things that helped me the most once I decided to become a writer was that I lucked into a gig a while ago where I had to write young adult biographies. Now, I didn't get to interview any of the subjects, but the basic rules of biographical writing were applied and utilized wonderfully because it's not he was born blah blah and he died blah blah and all the crap in between. There's a progress in people's lives, and I'm fascinated by talented or creative individuals. And it's like each chapter is opening a door, and then you go to the next chapter. That previous door was closed, and you go to the next. And also, too, there are themes that run through people's lives and work. When I did Hillary Clinton and Denzel Washington and some of the other people I had written about, I discovered that there are chunks of time in each person's life that often carry over to the next, and within those chunks are important themes, and that helped me write stuff when I was more than just a gun for hire. I would when I came to write Lee Marvin Point Blank, that helped me immensely, and that's how my writing career came to be. I started with Lee Marvin Point Blank in terms of mainstream adult contemporary nonfiction, and I eventually came on to Killing Generals. Oh, by the way, there's Lee Marvin Point Blank.
Ah, yes, I'm going to read that next. I've heard about it, but I love Lee Marvin, so I'm looking forward to diving into that book soon as well. I heard that this is one of your favorite films, The Dirty Dozen. I was curious what makes it a favorite. What makes it a favorite for you?
because it works on so many levels, every level imaginable in terms of what I particularly like in a great film. I don't know if you noticed it or not, and I love telling the story that the book is dedicated to both my girlfriend, Barbara, and my best friend, a guy named Mike Barrow. And I just wrote to Mike, he knows why. And the why is this: when we were growing up, it was our favorite movie. We used to watch it constantly. When VHS first came into being, I got it and we'd watch it together. And it got to the point where if we, either one of us, well, if he wasn't busy on a Saturday night, a Friday night, he would say, "Hey, call me up," and he'd go, "Want to watch The Dirty Dozen?" I'd say, "Sure." We did it so often, it got to the point where he would just call and just go, and I would go, "Okay, come on over."
Cue the music.
Right, exactly.
Wow, that's fantastic. And it's interesting because I know that you were also thinking of doing a book on Charles Bronson. You did the Lee Marvin book. I know you're a big fan of Steve McQueen and Cassavetes. And one thing that for me,
you have done your homework, young man. You have definitely done your homework.
Yes. Well, oh no, my pleasure. Well, but it was interesting because one thing that certainly is common amongst these guys is that they were tough. Aldrich too, the director of The Dirty Dozen, was a tough guy. What is it about these not that that's all not that they're only tough, there's a lot more to them, but what is it that appeals to you about these tougher types to write about?
Well, yeah, I know it's been brought to my attention before that I seem to be drawn to tough guys. It's not really. Right. I'm sure that's a factor, but I don't think of it that way. I think of it in terms of these actors having certain personality aspects in common, and one of them being their rebellious nature. They're all kind of mavericks. They've all, went against the mainstream. And I would include other actors as well. I used to have this holy trinity when I was growing up that I thought my three favorite actors: Steve McQueen, James Cagney, and Burt Lancaster. And they all had that in common. The three of them. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love actresses too. I just wrote a piece about Piper Laurie, who was one of my all-time favorite actresses. Yes. Yeah, right. I was really a huge fan, and Natalie Wood, and oh my gosh, so many others. But the point being is this: in terms of the time frame, I'm a retro pop film fan, and the film period that I love the most in American filmmaking were the 60s and 70s. That's when the production code came into being. Yes. Well, the old production code came out, and the new one was put in, so it gave more freedom to filmmakers. And also, too, the studio system had broken down. So people were, filmmakers, actors, screenwriters, directors, they were starting to be able to make the kinds of films they were never able to make before. And it shows. If you look at those films throughout most of the 60s and all of the 70s, that's my personal favorite period of filmmaking.
Yeah, me too.
I have favorites. Yeah, I've got favorites in every decade, though, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. But come the 60s and 70s, man, those movies were amazing. Absolutely amazing. And
absolutely.
And then, in my opinion, in terms of how individual and how independent films were, it kind of dropped off in the 80s and 90s. And to this day, comic book movies rule supreme. And that really bugs me.
Yeah, me too. Me. Yeah. No, me too. But the in terms of how the book was published, because I love this story you told, that it took about 20 years for you to get the Lee Marvin book published, and then when you got with your new agent Lee Sobel, he got a publisher lined up in 2 weeks. Do I have that right?
Pretty close. With Lee Sobel, my agent, my literary agent previously, was a gentleman named Mike Hammelberg, who really should be called Saint Mike. He was one of the best, most respectable, honest people I've ever known in my life, whether or not in the industry or not. He was just a great guy, and he passed away. And he, by the way, he had got me the Charles Bronson deal with the same publisher, Schaffner Press. But for a long, drawn-out story, which I'll avoid, that contract got canceled. So the Charles Bronson book never came to be. It still might yet, somewhere down the line. I don't know. But in any event, I was kind of in free fall after Mike passed away. And then Lee Sobel, out of nowhere, contacted me, which I thought was rather strange. I was like, I don't know how, agents do that. I always thought you had to go find the agent. The agent doesn't come looking for you. That's never been my experience. And when I told him that, he said, "Why are writers so cynical?" And it was, to me, it's just kind of common sense. But I checked him out. I looked him up. I did some research, and I discovered he's on the up and up. He's not a shyster. He's not a scumbag or any other term you want to use. And so we began talking about possible ideas. The first thing I asked him was about, what do you think about the idea of a bio on Charles Bronson? And he said, no, I don't think anybody's interested in that. And then we discussed some other possibilities. And I lucked out with him in the sense that he specializes in books about films and music. And so he was kind of a specialized agent that way. That's really hard to come by. And then we started discussing possibilities in terms of books about the making of specific films. And the first thing he said was, how about Point Blank? And I said, I like that movie. I don't love that movie, but I would, and he goes, well, what are your other Lee Marvin favorites? And then I said, Dirty Dozen. And he went, all right, let's go fishing. Let's see if anybody might be interested in that. Put together a proposal and I'll put it out there. And I did. And he put it out there and it sold amazingly fast. I mean, he and I were both shocked at how quick Kensington Press was interested in it. And so the only drag about that was because they picked it up so fast and they had a fast turnaround time, it didn't leave me a lot of time to do the research and writing. I had like 9 months, which is not normal. It's a really compacted window of time, but I did get lucky. And when I was doing the research, I have a friend, excuse me, Beverly Gray, who has written a couple of books about the making of films. She did a great one on the making of The Graduate. And so anyway, what I was working. And by the way, are you aware of the fact that I got the last interview with E.M. Nathanson, the author of the novel The Dirty Dozen? And I know, and she told me it's never been published. Nobody knows about it. And I said, no, I didn't know that, Beverly. Care to share? And she went, sure, I'll send you a CD of the interview. And she did. And that set me off. It was great. I was able to hit the ground running with that. And even though the movie was made over almost 60 years ago, most of the participants are long gone, but I was able to find some who were still with us. And my favorite example of that was being able to find the producer, a guy named Ken Hyman. Now, he's long off the grid. He's been retired for a long, long time. So I couldn't find him through the Producers Guild or any other normal sources. I won't go into detail about how I found him, but it was a great discovery that I did find him through his wife, who's a photographer. He's living in England. He's in his 90s, and he's still sharp as a whip. And I called him, and we spoke. And the first thing I said to him was, "Thank you for taking my call, Mr. Hyman." And he said, "Please call me Ken." And I went, "Yes, I will, Mr. Hyman." And he said, "Dwayne, you call me Mr. Hyman one more time, I'm hanging up this phone." And I said, "Okay, cool, Ken." And in finding him, I always like to smack myself on the back by saying, how come there's no Jewish detectives? You know, there's Sam Spade and Columbo, but I mean, where's Detective Schwartz? But anyway,
right.
And he was, it was amazing how on his game he was. He was sharp as a tack and he remembered so much. And from there, I was able to get a lot more. You know, what helped a lot too was the fact that my Lee Marvin book was so successful. I didn't have to explain myself all the time or, beg for an interview. All I had to do was just let them know who I was and what I had done. And boom, I don't think anybody turned me down for an interview. Oh, one would be, and it wasn't for lack of interest. One would be Robert Aldrich's daughter, who was his assistant in most of his work. But her husband had just passed and she was kind of like in bereavement mode. And she was probably the only one I didn't get to interview. But other than that, yeah, a lot of the adult children of the cast members and some of the people I had interviewed for the Lee Marvin book in talking about the Dirty Dozen, not everything they told me went in the Lee Marvin book, but they did go in Killing Generals. So I was able to use my own archives, as it were. So that helped a lot. And some of the other people that were still alive. I interviewed Donald Sutherland.
Yes.
And that was cool. And some of the other of what were called the bottom six, the other members of the cast who didn't get a lot of screen time. And they're still with us. And so, things like that. It made it able for me to get so many exclusives that most people didn't know about in terms of the making of the film.
Right. Well, you know, speaking of Kenneth Hyman, the producer of the Dirty Dozen, as I was reading, because I'd been thinking the past couple of years, it would be really interesting to get a book about Seven Arts, Warner Brothers Seven Arts,
Right.
who, as of course you know, who merged with Warner Brothers, because they produced, I mean, so many great films. Another
Yep.
Aldrich one, whatever happened to Baby Jane. They did The Hill, which the Lumet, which you talk about in the book. You know, Reflections of a Golden Eye. It's you know, it's endless. I mean, they were so much a part of the, you know, the new Hollywood movement at that
Right.
time,
And you
and
know,
it's interesting.
there's the success of the Dirty Dozen, and it was humongously successful. The success of that film launched the major careers of almost everybody involved in the movie. A real good
Right.
example would be Ken Hyman. After the Dirty Dozen was released and was a hit, that allowed him to become the production manager at Warner Brothers Seven Arts.
Yes.
Because they had merged. His father, Elliot Hyman, had started Seven Arts, and when Elliot Hyman, I guess, retired, he turned it over to Ken, and Ken ran Warner Brothers Seven Arts, and
Yes. Yes.
he gave us The Wild Bunch. He gave us oh my God, so many truly great
There's
movies.
so many.
Yeah, and as he told me, I never saw myself as an executive or a producer. I saw myself as a filmmaker, and if I can help young talent grow and do the work they want to do, I'll help them. He launched the careers of Paul Mazursky, gave Sam Peckinpah his biggest break, and Paul Newman's directorial debut was Rachel,
Yeah.
which
Right.
was a Warner Brothers Seven Arts film. I mean, he did a lot of great things.
Yeah,
Of course,
he certainly did.
he also turned down Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. So not everybody's record is clean. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not going to be perfect, but yeah,
Right.
I've often thought, you know, that would be an interesting book just to talk about Seven Arts. One thing
Yeah.
that you talked about was you got some criticism for the fact that you summarized the Dirty Dozen book in your book, which
Right.
it sort of puzzles me, because to me it was great that you illustrated where the books was and how that went to the screenplay, and how from the screenplay it changed in production because they made cuts to the script and things like that. So
Well,
I'm a little surprised
I'm glad
people.
you saw it
Yeah.
that way, because I've gotten
Yes.
both. I've gotten both responses. I've gotten people telling me in reviews, they'll say, I don't know why, but you just spent way too much time in the beginning of the book summarizing some key points of the novel. And if I wanted to read that, I'd read the novel. And other people have said, I'm so glad he did that because it saves me the trouble of having to read the novel. And the reason I did it is exactly what you just said. People aren't going to know what the book was about versus what the film was about unless you can show them the difference. And
Yeah, you have to.
thank you. Yeah, that's why I did it. And there was still, a certain amount of detail I left out about the book, but I did it so people could understand what Robert Aldrich did to compact the incidents that were in the novel. And the thing is, there were some major subplots that were completely truncated to go directly to the actual point of what he was trying to do in the film. And personally, I think it worked better that way. One of my favorite examples was the character of Maggot that Telly Savalas played. In the book,
yes.
Yeah, in the novel, he was three different people. Three of the dozen were one guy who was a religious fanatic, one guy who was a Southern bigot, and another guy who was a sexual psychopath. Those were three different guys. And by the way, the guy who was that character was given a lot of time in the novel, his backstory and everything else. That was all truncated and turned into one guy. And in reading the novel, it amazed me that how are they going to do this? How are these three variant personalities going to become one guy? Well, Telly Savalas pulled it off. He made it believable.
Yeah, it's certainly. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I wanted to ask a little bit about Cassavetes, because I know you're a big Cassavetes fan. I am too. He's actually my favorite filmmaker. And what I knew that he did this film and others at this time to complete Faces, the film he was working on. He needed more money to complete it. But I didn't know that he initially said no, and Hyman had to talk him into it, even though he really needed money. Did Hyman tell you that, or was that something you read?
Oh no, Ken Hyman told the way Ken
he told you that. Okay,
yeah, it was great. The way Ken said it to me was, he goes, John Cassavetes is a great director, terrific actor, decent writer, but he's also a great big pain in the ass. Is how he put it, because he told me he almost got in a fist fight with Cassavetes in order to talk him into doing it. And I could go into a little more detail about that, but I'd rather not. What that film did for him, Hyman talked him into doing it by telling him, "Look, John, you need money to finish your film. Take the gig at the Dirty Dozen. Use that money to finish your movie, and then you'll be fine." And Cassavetes ultimately agreed to that. Now, what that wound up doing, he had never really done that before, because he had worked as an actor. He had he struggled to make the films and statements he wanted to make in his film, but he never tied them together until the Dirty Dozen gave him the money to finish Faces. And what that wound up doing was created a path that led to him being on all of American independent cinema that way. He'd do a movie, he'd act in a movie for some good money, use that money to make his own films. That's how Husbands got made, Gloria, Minnie and Moskowitz. I mean, my personal favorite film of his is Husbands. I think that's a remarkable film. It's one of the most intimate details of male relationships I've ever seen in my life. I don't think I've ever seen anyone do it better. But anyway, that's how he did it. He would do Rosemary's. He'd star in Rosemary's Baby, which, by the way, he hated because he couldn't stand Roman Polanski. Yeah, and make another movie, and then make his own. And that is what led him to be called the godfather of American independent cinema. It started with the Dirty Dozen, with him accepting the Dirty Dozen.
Right. Yeah.
Which, by the way, that he loved making. He was surprised how well he got. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I knew he really liked Aldrich. And I could see
they were kind of on the same page. They were anti-Hollywood. They were mavericks. So they worked on the same level, which was cool. I'll tell you who else loved Cassavetes was Lee Marvin.
Right.
Somebody told me that Lee Marvin loved doing scenes with Cassavetes because he would always do something new. He would surprise him. He'd give him something to work with. Marvin loved that. He hated actors who just read their lines or waited for their cue and wasn't completely in the scene. He goes, not John. Right. Johnny always did something fun or different or unusual, which I thought that was really cool to find out.
Yes, because I heard a story. Well, you probably know it's from writing the Lee Marvin book, but wasn't it when he did The Killers? With that, every time he would try to do something different with Reagan, and Reagan would do the same thing and every single day.
That's right.
Yeah.
He told a friend, his co-star, Clu Gulager, whom I interviewed. He told Clu Gulager, this guy stopped acting the minute he got his SAG card, and I'm going to show you how bad he is. And
I love that.
He played this game with Clu Gulager that almost nobody knew he was doing. He would, in the beginning of the movie, he told Clu Gulager, he would go like, "Watch, I'm going to get everybody in this movie, and they're not going to know it." He would do a scene with an actor or actress, and then he would stand behind them after he would, quote unquote, get them, stand behind the actor and go, 1, or 2, 3, and my favorite was what he did with Reagan. Reagan was the last one because he had one final scene with him towards the end of the movie, and that was when they rehearsed it. They rehearsed the scene. They read the scene. They blocked the scene. They rehearsed the scene, and they shot the scene. Marvin purposely did his dialogue and gestures and blocking different every single time. Reagan never changed anything he did in the scene, and that's when he told Clu Gulager, this guy stopped acting when he got his SAG card. He drove the point home, and you could see it in the movie. It's amazing.
Yes, anyway. Yes, I love that story, and I suppose you only see him briefly with Cassavetes in The Killers when he kills him in the beginning. But I guess I imagine they didn't know each other that well at that point, at least creatively speaking. Right.
Yeah, I found out later Cassavetes wanted Lee Marvin for a film he was going to do in the early '70s, in
Oh,
which I love the premise of this. It would have been pretty much kind of like a documentary. It would be Lee Marvin and Anthony Quinn traveling cross country in different bars across the country and striking up either conversations or arguments with people in the bar, and they would be playing themselves. And Marvin's reaction was like, "John, are you crazy? You have any idea what'll happen if we do something like that?"
that
So
would
he
have been
passed on it.
interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I'd love to have seen
Yeah.
that.
Oh, I would have too. I would have too. Well, I was, and another story in the book that I thought was interesting was the E.M. Nathanson, who wrote the book, of course. He was led to believe that there was a real Dirty Dozen, that this was a true story, and then found out that it wasn't true. Was there any indication that, you know, did he hesitate about doing it after finding out it wasn't true, or did he just embrace it as a fictional book? Because obviously the
Yeah.
military came out and say, "Oh, that never happened. This is not accurate." Or was he not? I don't know if was he not concerned about people saying, "Oh, this stuff's not true or not realistic," or things like
Well,
that afterwards?
I'll put it to you like this: when he heard the story of the Dirty Dozen, and I love that he got it from Russ Meyer, the king of sleaze, Mr. Sexploitation, because during the war, Russ Meyer was a military photographer. Russ Meyer was the one who told him the story, and he told it to him as if it was true because he experienced it. Well, together, Nathanson and Russ Meyer did some research and did some digging. And I have to tell you, too, that's why I named the chapter this, that when Russ Meyer told Nick Nathanson the story, Nathanson's reaction was the hackles on the back of my neck went up. He said, I had never heard anything like this before in my life. And so, yeah, they did research. And in the research, trying to find, whether there really was an actual Dirty Dozen, and if there were, what happened to them, he kept getting nowhere. But while he was doing that, he was also looking at the transcripts of court trials of military convicts, those in the brig and the stockade, and he spoke with psychiatrists who had to deal with these men, and it gave him fodder for a great story. And not early on, but once he discovered that it was purely fiction, he decided and non-existent, he decided, I've got the makings of a great novel here. I can take all the information I got from what is actual, turn it into fiction, and make a great story here. And that's exactly what he did. So he never lost enthusiasm, it seems to me, from when he first heard about it. He kept at it. In fact, the more he researched and discovered, the more enthused he became.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking, because there's always people later on who are going to come out and say, who have hands-on experience, and say, oh well, this could have never happened. But as you point out in the book, the Nazis did similar things, I believe, right?
Yes, they did. And by the way, not just the Nazis. It happened fairly recently in the war in Russia with Ukraine. That guy that Putin bumped off, Prigozhin, the guy who started the Wagner Group, he was the one who recruited convicts. There is actual rare footage of him. I got this off of NBC News. There's actual rare footage of him trying to recruit convicts, and he did. And it's pretty creepy, the things he says. And it's a lot worse than what Reisman says in The Dirty Dozen, but it's kind of similar in that he tells these convicts, we're not going to say you can't have sex with who you're dealing with. We like to think of it more as a guideline, not a rule or a law. It's like, why is he saying that? That's bizarre. And also what they'll be allowed to do in terms of any kind of combat duty. And it goes pretty far out there. And as we know, that's exactly what they did in the Ukraine. They killed a lot of innocent people. And they called themselves, what's the word when you hire somebody for, I just went blank on the word, mercenaries, okay? They were considered mercenary. Really? They were terrorists, just like Hamas. And it's interesting in that it's a source of pride for one of the gentlemen I quoted, a guy named Dale Dye, Captain Dale Dye, who is an advisor for military films, so they get stuff right, like Platoon and Saving Private Ryan, movies like that. And it's such a pride that this country never did that. And he said he loves the movie. He thinks The Dirty Dozen is one of the greatest films of all time, but you can tell it's an act of fiction. The U.S. military would never recruit convicts. For the simple reason is it's absolutely impossible to get murderers and rapists and other violent men to fall in line and work cohesively as a team. But the Nazis did it. They did it in Yugoslavia. They opened up their prisons and gave all their worst criminals machine guns to deal with the Yugoslavian civilians. And that, the way he phrased it was like, that's an idea, an original idea of the Nazis. And he goes, but when you think of it, when was the last time a Nazi had an original idea? So, I mean, his bias is clear, but it's a bias based on experience and fact. He knows what he's talking about.
Well, it's sort of like what Hitchcock said, because people would criticize the fact that his stories were sometimes far-fetched or not plausible. And he's like, and I think he said something along the lines of, "It's like, if I can make you, it's about making you believe it's true."
Absolutely.
And that's really, either he said it or maybe critics of his who like his film said that. And that's really what, to me, is what pulls it off, because it feels so real at this tale of redemption of all these men with very dark, very, very dark pasts who find some good through coming together. And one thing that really dawned on me, because I watched the film, I've seen it before, but I watched it again before reading the book, and then it occurred to me, I was like, how so many people have done a variation on this story up until this day. And then when I read your book, you talk about that, all the sequels and different people having different spins on it for years. Something as recent as like the Suicide Squad, which was the one that came to my mind. That's not a very good movie, but still, it's like literally the exact same concept. Was that something that you were always conscious of throughout the years, or did it not kind of come together for you until you wrote the book?
The latter. I wasn't aware of how much the theme and the premise had been utilized after the Dirty Dozen. But in fairness, I have to tell you, it was also done before the Dirty Dozen. It just wasn't done on just the scale that the Dirty Dozen was. It was done, I mean, during the war, there were ridiculous movies of the Bowery Boys taking on Nazis, and Humphrey Bogart playing a Nazi in Passage to Mars. I mean, not a Nazi, excuse me, playing a gangster in All Through the Night and Passage to Marseille, where they're like, the basic idea is bad guys doing good things, and that's always fun to watch. And the Magnificent Seven. A ragtag group of gunslingers are brought together to help this Mexican village against marauding thieves. I mean,
it's not true.
It's not a new idea. It's just on the scale in which it was done, and more importantly, which Lee Marvin's character brings up throughout the film, especially in the beginning. When he's being told what the mission is, and he says, I think it's a good idea that we don't let out something let it be known something I've thought for a very long time. And Borgine goes, what is it? And Marvin says that somebody up there is just a raving lunatic to have a plan like this. And Borgine gets mad at him. Right. And also too, early on, Marvin tells him, I'm the one who's got to sell this to 12 happy smiling faces. You want to tell me what's in store for them? And they let it be known that this is a pretty insane idea.
Yeah.
How are they going to work together? How's it going to take place? And the thing you said a moment ago, that Hitchcock quote, it all comes down to a simple and it doesn't matter how outlandish it is, if the people involved can suspend disbelief.
Yes, exactly.
And that's exactly what they do in the beginning of The Dirty Dozen. They suspend the disbelief by confronting how ridiculous and unbelievable this premise is, but we're going to do it anyway.
Right.
And that's exactly what takes place.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say that about any given medium, be it literature, fiction, nonfiction, anything, or especially in film. If you can suspend disbelief That's half the battle. And a lot
Yes.
of times that attempt to suspend disbelief doesn't work. It
Right.
just doesn't, because
It's true.
you know, I've watched movies with people, and I've done it myself. Where you'd be watching the movie going, "Oh, come on,
Right.
you really expect us to buy that? Really?" So
Yes.
it's a very delicate balance. But if you're a decent filmmaker and have a creative way of getting around that problem, it can work.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. And you know, one thing that I forgot, because I hadn't seen it in a while, was how it's a pretty, there's a lot of brutality in this film. Like it's like it starts with a hanging, and
Right.
for me, one of the scariest moments in the film is towards the end when they're throwing the grenades. What exactly was that into the it's like a
The air vents.
Yes, that was it. The air vents and the
Yeah,
gasoline.
but first they put
you
gasoline
know,
in. Yeah.
Yes, the gas. Yes, yes. And I'm like, you know, all those people down there who are screaming. I mean, there's so many scenes that are just absolutely frightening. So to think just before this is still, as you said earlier, in the days of the production code, right before the rating system came in, to think
The
that
year
they even
before.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, to think that they managed to even get some of these things through, it's pretty pretty incredible.
There's because the movie's been around so long and has been so incredibly popular all along. It's not dated. There have been some urban legends about the movie, and one of the things I was glad I was able to do was dispel some of those legends. One of them being that, and they even had Ernest Borgnine say this to the intro of the movie on DVD, that had Robert Aldrich changed the ending of the film, he would have gotten an Oscar nomination, because producers and the honchos in Hollywood thought that ending was too brutal and too violent. That's not true. He was never told that. I asked Ken Hyman about that, and Ken Hyman was like, "I never heard that." And besides, there's no way Bob would have changed the ending anyway. We were all for it. We thought it worked. And so the real reason why he didn't get an Oscar nomination is because he hated Hollywood and Hollywood hated him. It was a mutual dislike. One of my favorite quotes of his is he once said, just because of the way Hollywood works, especially in those days, he said, you know, if I were to make a biblical epic, I still wouldn't get an Oscar nomination. Like, you know, Ben-Hur, Ten Commandments, movies like that, which always does. He said, if I made a biblical film, I wouldn't get an Oscar nomination. Well, truth of the matter is, he did make a biblical film. It was Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
So that shows you where he differs from Hollywood.
Right. Well, you know, to me, he's I know you said this as well, like he's criminally underrated. I mean, he's made
definitely.
so many good films that even to this day, I don't think people would know. I mean, obviously some of them are very well known, like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and Things Dirty Does It, of course. But
the longest yard.
The Longest Yard,
which is kind of a nice revival of the themes that were in The Dirty Dozen.
That's true. You know? Yes.
The cons against the guards.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Even not that long ago, someone suggested I watch I forget the Sister George. It's about the lesbian couple.
Oh, The Killing of Sister George. Yeah.
The killing. Yes.
Yeah. You know, I'll tell you something. Two things real quick. He was another example of somebody who got I mean, he'd been a working veteran as a director for a long, long time. But with the success of The Dirty Dozen, he sold his rights to The Dirty Dozen. With the gross it got, I think he had like 6% or 10%, something like that. He sold it, got a plethora of money for it, and bought his own studio.
Right.
I mean, that's pretty damn impressive. He already had his own production company, but he used the money to buy a studio, and then he proceeded to make the kinds of movies he wanted to make. All of them flopped, all of them, and so he had to sell the studio. But you know, The Killing of Sister George, not Play Dirt. What's it? Play Dirt. It was a war film with Michael Caine and Cliff Robertson, and what's the matter with Helen? He just made a lot of those kinds of Baby Jane, Hot Such Sweet Charlotte movies. The Legend of Lila Claire. I know he became a kind of
he did. I forgot he did Hustle too, which is all with Catherine Deneuve and Burt Reynolds. I forgot that was him.
Yeah.
I mean, so many.
and the allusion you made earlier to um, not just brutality, but kind of suspense in his films. I think he's right up there, maybe even better than Hitchcock when it comes to creating suspense in a given scene. I know for a fact he added moments in The Dirty Dozen just to keep the audience on the edge of their seat. When Bronson and Marvin are in the chateau, and Marvin throws the grappling hook on the roof, and then a guard walks by, they run inside real quick, and Marvin says to Bronson, "I left the rope." And you see and you're wondering, oh fuck, is that? Oh, sorry.
No,
oh,
it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Is that guard going to see that? You know, is the whole mission going to go sky high? And like the characters in the movie, when Jim Brown pulls the hand grenades and starts running and throwing them in the ventilators, the characters in the movie are going, "Go, Jefferson, go!" I never saw it in the theaters. I was too young, but I know for a fact people have told me when they saw the movie in the theaters, people were cheering along with Marvin and Bronson and Cassavetes. Right. Go, Jefferson, right. Go! And when he gets shot, people have told me everybody went, "Oh, no,
it's devastating."
Yeah.
I know
it's like you didn't expect it. Yeah, and that's how a great filmmaker does his job. He sucks the audience in, and they're into every moment. And the more suspenseful, the better. One of my favorite examples in the scene when Lee Marvin goads Clint Walker into trying to stab him, and you see all the other dozen going, "Stick 'em, do it," and the cuts are brilliant. The editing by Michael Luciano, who was Oscar nominated, by the way, you see it slowly build from him goading Clint Walker, and Clint Walker keep walking backwards, and the other dozen standing up going, "Do it." And then they cut to Richard Jekyll, the MP, reaching for his gun. And then as the scene goes on, the cuts get quicker and quicker. He knew how to build to a conclusion. So, I mean, this guy was great. I loved
He certainly was. Yeah, he was a phenomenal filmmaker. And you know, speaking like even when, because I love Cassavetes so much that when he gets killed at the end, I always feel so bad, you know, particularly because he was celebrating, because he's like, we made it, and then sure enough, he gets killed. And I did not know that in the book they kill him because he was trying to get them to surrender, and the dozen shoot him.
Yeah, and because that never happened, as they were leaving the chateau, he is in the half track with Reisman, and he puts a gun to the back of Reisman's head. And Reisman never knows this, but he gets killed by the Richard Jekyll character, Bowron. The MP, Clyde Bowron, shoots Victor Franco, which is very different than the movie, obviously.
Yes, very different. Yeah, completely different. So, and I suppose in a way, perhaps the only character you see that really then goes against the dozen is, of course, what is his name? His name, the actor plays Kojak. His name always escapes.
Oh, Telly Savalas.
Telly, yes, Telly. And
Maggot.
You know, yes, Maggot. And what a brilliant performance! And when he cracks and then kills that woman, who was a, I suppose was she with? I don't know if she was with the Nazis. I don't know if she was like her character was like a prostitute or.
Yes. It's all of the above. To all of the above.
Yes.
You know, and that's another thing. A lot of critics, when the film came out, you know, the movie didn't get rave reviews. It got some. It got the definition of what's called mixed reviews. And many of the critics who didn't like it complained about the fact that innocent people were killed by American GI. Well, the point that Lee Marvin made when that was brought up to him, it was kind of like, I don't know how innocent anybody is who hangs out with Nazis necessarily, you know? And the character that he kills, the actress's name is Dora Reiser. I got to interview her too. She's still alive. And one of the most interesting aspects of that is that she's playing a Nazi prostitute, and she herself, when she was a little girl, was had to hide out from the Nazis in Bulgaria. And I asked her about that, and she said, "Let me tell you something. It's been a long time since I've seen those scuttle helmets and those Nazi uniforms." And she goes, "And it churned in the pit of my stomach. But I was an actress, I'm a professional, and I had to do what was required of me." So, I mean, there's an interesting irony there, I think.
Oh, certainly. That must have been incredibly difficult. But she's so she's so good in it.
Yeah, I
Even though
know.
we only see her briefly in that scene with Telly. I mean, he's so frightening. And I did like the fact that we did see one, at least one of these guys sort of,
Yeah, well,
crack
and
and
that's the other
going,
thing. One of
go
the major,
insane.
yeah, one of the major themes in the movie is Weissman trying to get them all to work together as a team, which he eventually
Yeah,
does. But you never ever see Maggot join them. He goes
that's true.
along, but and that's why it makes the most amount of sense that the whole battle gets started with Maggot losing it, and it's rather perfectly ironic that it's Jim Brown who kills him. Because
Yes, because he was
yeah,
racist.
right.
Telly, Savalas, and Cassavetes, both Greek, were arguing about where the best Greek restaurants were in New York. I would
I
love
know
to be a
that.
fly on the wall.
I know that's one of my favorite stories. I found out.
Yeah.
There was friction for some obvious reasons in the cast because this is one of the single most eclectic casts in movie history, and to my mind, practically an all-star cast. So there's going to be friction. These are very opinionated men, but for the most part, they did get along. They all got along when they had to.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Ken Hyman told me he was there every single day of production, and he said the very first day of the table read, they had 2 weeks of rehearsal. And he goes, from the very first day, I was amazed watching them turn into the dozen. You can see it; they were very slowly becoming their characters, and
Right.
I thought that was a pretty cool way to put it. He saw them morph into their roles, and to give you an example of how they didn't always get along early on. Oh, and by the way, almost the entire cast were military veterans. Most of them were actually in the war, and
Right.
that includes Lee Marvin and Charles Bronson. And early on, when there was a scene in the beginning of the movie when the Sergeant Barwin's character tells the prisoners, "Eyes right," and Bronson goes, "I was in the army. It's not eyes right. It's
I
eyes
remember
left."
this. Yes.
Yeah, and Marvin goes, "I was in the Marines. It's eyes right." And then they start arguing, right? And they were like, right. The way it was described was like their faces are right in each other. And Robert Aldrich, who was built like a bulldog, right? Big,
Right.
stocky guy, big bulldog face. He gets right in between them and goes, "I don't care if it's eyes right or eyes left. You do it the way we tell you. Now shut the fuck up." And Bronson, no slouch, big tough guy. Marvin, even a bigger tough guy. They just slowly backed into their seats because they knew Aldrich was the boss. He's in charge.
Yes, that's probably a big reason why it came together as well as it did, because you had such a tough director who's probably could have been like, coach of a football team if he had to. He could have done it.
Matter of fact, when he was in college, he was going to be a football player, but he injured his knee, so he had to give that up. And that was one of the reasons why he hired Jim Brown, because he was a huge football fan. He loved football.
Right. Well, I mean, speaking of what I'll just show some of these photographs inside.
Oh, cool.
That's because you just mentioned the table read, and that's when they're all meeting, and I love that. I love that.
Yeah, it's a great thing about that picture. I mentioned it to Clint Walker when I had interviewed him, and he saw it, and he went, "Yeah, I always kind of thought of that as the Knights of the Round Table." And I got that photo from Bob Phillips, the guy who played Corporal Morgan. He was another one.
Right.
Another guy I got to interview, and I spent the day with him, and he told me such incredible. You can tell you read the book.
Yes.
Some of the stories he told me were amazing.
Oh, they're phenomenal.
Yeah. So I mean, I got lucky in some of those photos. Most of those photos I got from Ken Hyman. Like the one with him and Charles Bronson, and Bronson wrote on the photo, "To Ken, your only friend, Charlie."
Yeah, the photos are incredible. Do you feel that it's an anti-war film? Is that your feeling about what they were getting at here?
I've always felt that no film can be really, even if it's advertised or promoted as anti-war, can really be anti-war if they show battle scenes. That's they're showing battles. But I've amended that thought, because there are movies that are indeed anti-war that have battle scenes. Paths of Glory, probably the greatest anti-war film ever made. I wouldn't go so far as to call The Dirty Dozen anti-war, but I will say it's anti-military. See, one of the things that made the film such a success was the timing of its release. It came out in '67, and we were in the midst of the Vietnam War, and the Vietnam War was beginning to fall out of favor with a lot of people. There were protests against it. It was just starting to get really, really nasty in the streets of America, and there was, burning of the draft card and all that kind of stuff. It really began in '67, and so audiences, especially young audiences, the demographics, loved it on that level. They saw that it was anti-military. And older audiences liked it because it was World War II. And most of those older audiences were in World War II. So it was the best of both worlds. And Robert Aldrich even said years later, he said, there is no way, shape, or form we could have planned for the movie to strike the chord that it did when it did. It was the logic of a perfect storm. Yeah, absolutely. And not just in this country. The original anti-war protest began in France, which is where the Vietnam War began, and it took off from there. So I mean, it's an interesting, timing of events.
Yeah, because to me, it just feels like it's very much the experience of war, as opposed to having some sort of message. It's just that these things have very bad effects on the people who are in it, which you see right especially at the end, when in the hospital, which is part of your title, Killing Generals, when Bronson says this is going to begin to be a habit, killing these generals. And I thought, because now it's like they're turned into, these machines in a way. Full Metal Jacket has a similar feel to me. Speaking of Kubrick, it's just very much like the war just messes people up. I mean, that's what
and they drive the point home with that last scene in the movie, which goes back to the original point in the opening of the film, when Lee Marvin goes into that meeting with all the other officers, and they're not in the barracks or a bunker. They're in this palatial English palace, I guess, which is being used by Ernest Borgnine. And they got this long conference table, and it's like a business meeting. Borgnine makes a lame joke, and everybody laughs. They're like, yes men in a corporate environment. And in the end of the movie, when Robert Webber and Ernest Borgnine, the commanders of the group, Bronson and Marvin and Richard Jekyll, they're the sole survivors, and they're wounded. They're messed up.
Yeah,
and they say such phony stuff as, good job, soldier. We need you back on the line. And, and then they smile and wink and leave. And that's why Bronson says that. Boy, oh boy. Perfect. Killing generals can get to be a habit with me. It's like, these guys don't care about human life or what their job is. They just want to make points. They want to get, promotions. They want to make everybody happy. It's a PR game. And that's exactly what Bronson's line is all about.
Yeah.
And so it's very much anti-military, but I don't know if it's anti-war or not.
No,
and it's also very anti-authority too.
Oh, extremely. That's for sure. We see that right off the bat with the way Marvin is interacting with his superiors. A film you talked about, the film Overlord that Stuart Cooper did. He played Roscoe Lever, which I'd never heard of before, and I was like, oh, that looks really interesting. And I saw it on the Criterion Channel. What do you think of that film?
I thought his concept was brilliant. By shooting scenes in black and white with a cast of characters and intercutting it with known stock footage that's in black and white and creating a story, I thought it was brilliant. I loved it. I thought the execution was wonderful. I just didn't particularly buy the premise that well. Is that a decent way to say it? It's not that I didn't buy the premise. I thought the plot wasn't really congealed enough. It didn't come together for me. But the way he utilized that footage was terrific.
Yeah, no, I agree. I didn't think it was necessarily a great film, but I thought it really gave you the feeling of the anxieties of war and the fact that these people can be killed at any second. So for me, it was really that feeling of fear, and as opposed to, Killing General, Dirty Dozen is quite a thick plot, whereas this, it just feels like it's a real sort of mood piece. to
Right,
me.
exactly.
But
Yeah, that's
I
a
thought it
good way
was
to say it. Yeah, I
yeah,
agree.
I thought it was really really good. So I was glad you wrote about it in the film. And I just wanted to touch on Donald Sutherland a bit because his career really took off after this, and the comedy he brings to it, and who, at this point I don't believe he had really even done much comedy, but just in his smile alone, like I love the scene he has with Cassavetes when early
I
on.
know the scene.
It
Hey,
was so
you
great.
you like it here? Well, I don't know. You want to get out of here? We got no place to go. Ah, you're an idiot. It was great. It was absolutely great.
Yeah, well, yeah, because it just told you right there, like, okay, clearly Franco's looking for an ally to get out of there, and just the
That's right.
fact that
One's a schemer and one's a moron. You know?
exactly. And he's always smiling, which is like not always, but often, which makes him sort of goofy and
Oh, most definitely goofy. I got to speak with him mostly through email, and he told me
right,
wonderful stories about how he interpreted the character. Because interestingly, not in the film or in the book, the original novel, is Vernon Pinkley ever his he has no backstory. He's just one of the dozen. You don't know what he's in for. You don't know, anything about the crime itself. And Donald Sutherland told me that he goes, "Yeah, I know that. I read the book. So I came up with what Vernon Pinkley did wrong." And he said, "I
right.
created a whole character that way." And he goes, "And I saw it behind my eyelids. There was a camera behind my eyelids that I saw everything." And he knew how Pinkley would talk, how he would move, how he would react. And he put that in the film. And to go back to the idea that this film launched the careers or just that the Dirty Dozen got Donald Sutherland the role in MASH because
Right.
Robert Altman was considering him, but wasn't sure if Donald Sutherland could do comedy. Donald Sutherland got his agent to send Robert Altman that scene from the Dirty Dozen where he's inspecting the troops, and Altman went, "Okay, you're Hawkeye," and his career took off from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's wonderful in it, and his inventiveness really certainly paid off.
You bet.
But again, it's such a great book. I love the cover as well. Killing Generals. Where is the best place for people to get it? It's pretty much available anywhere books are sold, I imagine, online at least, anyways.
Yeah, well, I know that for a fact. It's available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and pretty much anywhere online. Anyway, fine books are
Hmm.
sold. They're also, I know they're in bookstores. I know they're in Barnes and Noble. I went to Barnes and Noble and signed a couple of copies.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And if you go to the bookstore and you're interested, I mean, you want to go to a brick and mortar store to buy it. That's how I prefer, because I like to actually sit in the bookstore and page through a book and see what I'm dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not there, ask for it. They will
Right.
order it, and that would be
True.
the best way to get it.
What can you talk? Can you talk about anything that you're working on now? I believe there's something about McQueen in the works, or maybe you don't want to talk about it.
You, you sneaky devil, you. I have developed once again, interestingly, through a podcast I did about killing generals. There was a gentleman who was starting up a website that I did the podcast with, and he contacted me outside the podcast and asked me if I'd be interested in writing for his website. And it's called Hollywood.com, and a special column called Hollywood History. And it was amazing in that anything I suggested, he went, "Great, do it." When Piper Laurie passed, I wrote a piece about her performance in The Hustler.
Oh yeah, so good.
Oh boy, incredible!
That's one of my favorite films. The Hustler.
Mine too. Mine too.
So good, so good.
And when the first thing I did was a story he pitched to me. Well, he asked me, "Are you a Michael Caine fan?" And I went, "Not really. I like some of his films." But and then he said, "Oh, well, then I guess you're not interested in doing something about his latest and probably last film." And I went, "What is it?" And he told me it's called The Great Escaper. So I did some research and discovered a great angle to take that about the military films that Michael Caine has made and tie it all together with this film, The Great Escaper, which has a great premise, and I'd love to see it. I haven't seen it yet. And so what's interesting is that story that I wrote, it was viewed by Ken Russell's widow. Are you familiar with Ken Russell?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, Ken Russell's widow saw it. Now, apparently, Ken Russell had been friends with Michael Caine. And when she saw it, she shared it on her Facebook page and told everybody, this is the best thing I've ever read about Michael Caine. Everybody should read it. And apparently the hits went through the roof when she did that. And I was like, oh my God, thank you. And the most recent one I did when you mentioned Steve McQueen has to do with the person I deal with asked me, well, I told him I'm a big Steve McQueen fan. And he said, so am I, would like to write something about him. And I had recently done a podcast about killing generals, but also the guy who ran the podcast is this big Steve McQueen fan. And he wanted to have me talk about Steve McQueen and Lee Marvin together. And at one point, when I discovered what a big Steve McQueen fan this guy was, I said, let me guess, your favorite films are like Bullet, The Great Escape, Magnificent Seven, Papillon. And he went, yeah, I like those movies too. But you know what? There are a lot of people who like those movies and also call themselves Steve McQueen fans, but they haven't seen a lot of his movies. And some of them, the best ones, are the ones people never heard of. And that gave me the idea. I did a piece called Seldom Seen Steve McQueen. And,
yes.
And it's all about the films
on your Facebook page. I still have to read it, but I saw it on your Facebook page.
Oh, thank you. That's great. And it's funny. I got a lot of people agreeing with me or saying that, oh, this sounds interesting. I got to check this out. I got to see this movie. I got to do that. That's what I want to hear. Also, some people are kind of like, what? How come you didn't include Bullet? I was like, read the headline, stupid. You know? Well, I didn't say that. And then some people wanted me to include The Blob.
The Blob, right.
A movie he did called The War Lover, which I almost did include, but I had limited space. I didn't include The War Lover because I found his character in that movie completely reprehensible. He's such a bastard in that film.
You know, I haven't seen that yet. I'll have to see that one. That one I have not seen.
Oh yeah, it's an interesting character study. Which is he's a pilot of a B-17, and his co-pilot is Robert Wagner, and he just the nastiest things in the movie. Just he's in the movie Hell is for Heroes. The character he played in that, Reese, is kind of similar to Rickson in The War Lover, except Rickson in The War Lover is much more flamboyant and extroverted, and I don't care for McQueen that way. I like seeing him the way he was in Hell is for Heroes. He's controlled, he's introspective, and he's a psychopathic killer. And I love finding out that when the film came out and when it was released, Stanley Kubrick sent Steve McQueen a telegram telling him, this was your performance was the single most believable, realistic portrayal of a soldier I have ever seen in a movie.
Oh, wow.
Stanley Kubrick. I mean, that's not bad, right?
Yes, that's high praise.
You bet.
Wow, fantastic. And are you a big? Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I'm doing that, and it looks to be fairly regular, which is great. And I get to pick the subject, which I love. And the other thing I'm working on is about 3-4 weeks ago, I signed a contract for a biography on Roy Scheider.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and that's going to come.
I love Scheider.
Oh yeah, man, he was just one of the best.
Oh yeah, for
sure. His heyday was like throughout the 1970s. He could do no wrong, you know.
Yes.
And they want me to do it so it comes out around the same time as, believe it or not, 50th anniversary of the release of Jaws.
I figured, yeah.
Yeah, and I can't believe it's been 50 years, but it's about his life and work.
Oh well, that'll be great. I'm looking forward to reading that. And are you a big social media person in terms of X, which is Twitter now called X, or Instagram and stuff like that? Or are you? Can people follow you online?
Yes, they can. To tell you the truth, and my girlfriend Barbara complains about this to me. I get sucked into social media way too easily. There's so many interesting things to check out, and so many morons too. But yeah. I post on social media a lot, mainly Facebook, but also Twitter, and for some reason I'm having a problem getting on Instagram, but also LinkedIn and some other websites, but mostly Facebook, and the results seem to be successful. I used to write a lot about politics, but in doing that, I engendered way too many nastiness, and my list of blocked friends and family is like 3 pages long because I just, I can't, I just figured now I don't ever write about politics that often. Maybe once or twice when there's something worthy, but for the most part, I just promote my work, which, seems to be successful.
Yes, I don't blame you for staying clear sometimes on social media with politics is not always easy to discuss online. But again, the book is called Killing Generals, which I highly recommend, and I will leave the links in the description box below for where you can follow Dwayne on social media. I'll leave his handles below. And Dwayne, thanks again. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope you can come again sometime down the road. I'm going to read your Lee Marvin book for sure, so come again sometime.
Hey, if you want to schedule something after you read Lee Marvin, I'm fine with that. Or after Roy Scheider comes out.
Oh, for sure.
I'm fine with that too, because I love talking to somebody who knows what I'm talking about when it comes to talking about great films, the retrospective aspect of it. Because I've done a lot of podcasts where people will go, huh? What is that? I never heard of that. Or not read the book either. That's rather embarrassing on occasion. But for the most part, people like you and a handful of others make my job so much fun. I love doing this. I really do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. Patreon is exclusive content that I create month in and month out. And as a subscriber, you are able to vote on polls and contribute to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. So head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to my YouTube channel by pressing the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on the thanks link and you can leave a donation there if you choose to. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left. In just a second, just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. Also click the like button and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of this episode. Also, you can also share the episode. All of these things are what produce traction to my YouTube channel. So I appreciate you watching and thank you again. And I will see you in the next episode.